Hello, everyone. This is Pastor Alan Hathaway. I'm glad that you joined me for this sermon today. I'm going to be talking to you about the measure of hard-headedness. When we talk about hard-headedness in our lives, we think about a lot of different things, and it can be used in a positive way. When we talk about somebody being determined about something and being pragmatic about getting there, so we often will say that they're a hard-headed person. But that's generally said with some admiration because they're working hard at a goal and being determined about it. They are convinced that it's the right direction to go. We also use the term in a negative sense about people that are stubborn and are unwilling to be changed by facts or argument or direction. And so they continue in that course without any willingness to accept correction or any kind of direction in their lives. I thought about this in relationship to the two stories that are told in John's Gospel, John chapter 5 and John chapter 9. There are a lot of comparisons between these two stories about Jesus. They're both healing accounts. One is the healing of the lame man at the pool of Bethesda. The other is the healing of the blind man at the pool of Siloam. Both happen in Jerusalem. Both involve unusual circumstances with large pools of water, actually swimming pool size pools of water. The other thing they involve is very different relationships to the water. In the one case, the lame man is waiting to step in and be healed. In the other case, the blind man is actually in another part of Jerusalem, and Jesus smears mud on his eyes, made from his own spittle, and tells him to go wash in the pool of Siloam. I thought about both of those in relationship to our lives. Very often we are called upon to understand what Jesus is and who he is. This concept of knowing Jesus is central to the Gospel of John. John wants to introduce us to who Jesus is, and these two particular narratives about healings are very much a part of this. In fact, they take up large sections of the Gospel of John. In chapter 5, this particular healing begins a process of confrontation between Jesus and the leaders of the Jewish community. They challenge him, first of all, upon the issue of performing miracles on the Sabbath. But really the issue for them is that Jesus is having a different message than they are. They are the ones who are there to interpret the words of Moses. They are the ones to establish the direction that God has. And Jesus is saying, I am here to provide healing and blessing and forgiveness from God for people. I have come in to this situation as the Savior of the world. They're having a hard time accepting that. That means that their position is going to be challenged unless they accept the direction and the lordship of Jesus Christ. The world is shifting for them, and they become quite hard-headed about this. No matter what Jesus says to them, no matter how well he argues, no matter what witnesses he calls in his defense, they are going to be unwilling to accept that. They are determined on it. In the last part of this chapter, Jesus says to them, I have a witness. In fact, I have two witnesses. In the Jewish faith, it required two witnesses to establish a fact. Jesus says, I'm going to establish a fact. The first witness is the miracles that I have done. These miracles and the message that I have proclaimed comes from God. And God, because of the miracles I have done, is witnessing to you that my message is approved and that I indeed am who I say I am. He will then go on to say that Moses witnessed to me. And you yourselves proclaim that you are the interpreters of Moses, but you are refusing to accept the message that I am bringing to you. And so I won't condemn you, but Moses will condemn you because you have failed to heed his statements about me. And Jesus is pointing very clearly to Genesis chapter 3, and also he is pointing to Moses' statements in Deuteronomy chapter 18 and Deuteronomy chapter 5, and the concept of God's perfect prophet and messenger of salvation, and that they must heed that message. So Jesus is very clear about this concept, and he challenges them about their hard-headedness in receiving the message. But we also see another case of hard-headedness in the more positive sense in John chapter 9. Jesus has healed the blind man, and he comes back from the pool of Siloam, and he is seeing, and people are amazed, and they say, "Is this the guy?" And everyone says, "Well, it can't be. He was blind from birth. This couldn't be." And he says, "Yes, I am the man. And Jesus healed me." And so they take him to the Pharisees, and the Pharisees begin questioning him and challenging him and confronting him with the idea that Jesus can't be a good man because he healed on the Sabbath, and Jesus can't be a good man because he's a false teacher in their opinion. And this man says, well, if he's a false teacher, he's done this miracle which nobody's ever heard of before. This is certainly the hand of God. This is God's hand. And so this man must be at least a prophet, if not something more. This is astounding. And finally they start accusing him of blasphemy and attacking him personally, and also insulting him. And then eventually they end up just throwing him out. And Jesus finds him and says, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And he says, "Well, I'm not sure who that is." And Jesus says, "I'm the Son of Man. I am the Messiah that you've been looking for." And he says, "I believe. I believe." So he was kind of hard-headed, but from that pragmatic standpoint, that he was willing to believe in Jesus and not change direction. We live in a world that needs some of that hard-headedness. In the late 1600s, skepticism began in earnest in Western culture. It was sort of quietly in the background, but by the late 1700s, it was out in the open, and many of the people who were intellectuals and academics were open skeptics about who Jesus was and the character of God as it was revealed in the Christian faith. They would go on to promote the idea that much of the stories around Jesus were legends and mythology. By the early 1900s, this whole direction would be called the quest for the historical Jesus. By the middle of the 1900s, it would be pretty much defunct, mainly because so many discoveries were found that proved that Jesus was a historical person, that indeed many of the things that they believed in the New Testament itself was much earlier than scholars had believed and were supposing. In fact, in 1920, a small fragment of the Gospel of John was found and was dated to around 140 AD. That dating puts it within 50 years of the traditional date for the writing of the Gospel of John. As the century went on, discoveries such as the actual pool of Bethesda in the north of Jerusalem, and in 2005, they would find the pool of Siloam, and they would be identical to what John describes in his gospel. They had been buried for almost 2,000 years. And then they were discovered, and when they got done with the archaeology, it was found that they were exactly like John described them, and they were in the places where John said they were, which kind of astounded a lot of people. The discovery of that fragment of the Gospel of John would upend almost 2 centuries of skeptical, scholarly thought and debate. And they would discover that indeed the Gospel of John was written by a Jewish man who had actually seen the city of Jerusalem, who had actually an understanding of the geography of it. And that would change everything. But many of those academics and scholars remained hard-headed, and they just changed their tactics. And they continue to change their tactics as more and more discoveries come out to prove that the Gospels are accurate and that they do tell the story of Jesus Christ, and indeed the Christian faith that believed in the divinity of Jesus, believes in the resurrection, believes in the salvation message, has pretty much believed that since the very beginning. And so you can't change that very easily. You can disbelieve it. You can believe that we're mistaken, but the story goes back to the very beginnings. And Jesus did exist. There's not very many people that'll dispute that anymore. He did die on a cross. His disciples very clearly believed he was resurrected from the dead. Now, you can believe that they were mistaken, but you cannot disbelieve that that's what they believed. And that is an important truth. Do you know Jesus? Do you know who he is? Do you want to know who he is? I invite you to explore that. God bless. Have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you in church.